Okay, we're in order. Hopefully Mr. Christofferson will be here soon. Well, good morning and welcome to the 32nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs of the first session of the 42nd Parliament. Today we begin our study of the Chief Electoral Officer's report entitled An Electoral Framework for the 21st Century, Recommendations from the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada following the 42nd election. I would like to remind members that today's meeting is being televised. Allow me to introduce our witnesses. From Elections Canada, we have Mark Mayron, the Chief Electoral Officer, Stéphane Perreault, Associate Chief Electoral Officer, and Michelle Roussel, Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Electoral Events. Just as a reminder, in case there's any new journalists listening in and the public, to set the context for this is after every election, the Chief Electoral Officer for Canada does a report, and in the report there's recommendations. Those come to this committee. Traditionally, this committee goes through, there's well over 70 recommendations. They go through detailed. Apparently it took 25 meetings last time, so it's a lot of work. And then that goes as a recommendation to the government to implement, and often much of it gets implemented into legislation. So this is, just so people aren't confused, this is totally separate from the Electoral Reform Committee. There's another committee making proposals going across the country at the moment. A number of the members of this committee are actually on that committee, but it's looking at revising the electoral system to have another voting way. This particular report is on the technicalities of the voting, how you appoint poll clerks, how you do ridings, if you have electronic voting, all the technicalities that would fit into any system of Parliament. I think after we have the opening remarks, we'll go into the regular round of questioning. Conservatives would prefer that. So each party should pick who's going to speak first for their round of questioning. So if that's okay, and welcome back. We've, I know this is your last report. We've enjoyed having you many times, and you've really stimulated with a lot of good new ideas. I know there's a lot in this report. It will take us a lot of meetings, but I'm sure certainly it'll improve the electoral process in a modernized, fastly changing world. And whatever system we're going to have in place, the technicalities that I know that you're proposing would fit in all those systems. And so we certainly want to make it sure that voting is fair and that everyone can vote as easily as possible. And I know you've got lots of recommendations to that effect. So look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. I'm very pleased to be here today to present my recommendations for improving the administration of the Canada Elections Act. The changes proposed in the report aim at building a more modern and inclusive electoral framework. I believe these amendments are essential to bring the Canada Elections Act into the 21st century, irrespective of any change to the voting system. The report comprises two parts. The first part, consisting of 2 chapters, is a narrative that describes what I see as the most important recommendation and their objectives. The second part contains 3 tables of amendment. Table A covers the recommendation discussed in the narrative. Table B offers additional substantive recommendation that would improve the administration of the Act. And Table C lists a series of minor or technical amendments. I have structured it in this way to facilitate your work, given the number of recommendations contained in the report. I would urge you to concentrate your immediate attention on the narrative, as it covers the most pressing issues. You may even wish to consider reporting on this series of amendments before any other. I believe we are at a critical point in the administration of Canadian elections. If we do not act to modernize several core aspects of our electoral process, I fear we will fail to meet Canadians' expectations in 2019. Elections Canada is committed to an ambitious modernization agenda that aims to leverage technology to improve election delivery and services. Legislative changes must be in place well in advance of the 2019 elections for us to fully realize these improvements for the benefit of Canadians. The recommendations I've made to modernize the Act are inspired by three main themes. The first is accessibility and inclusiveness. The second, flexibility and effectiveness. And the third, fairness and integrity. Before I address these three themes, however, I would like to make a general observation about the Canada Election Act. It is well known that many components of the Act are anchored in the 19th century, when the first elections in Canada took place. While it has served us well over these many long years, it is clear from recent experiences that the electoral process set out in the Act is showing signs of strain. In many respects, it has failed to keep up with the times. The Canada Elections Act is not a law that lends itself well to technology, for instance. It provides little opportunity to scale voting services to meet local or changing needs. It also fails to provide the flexibility required to improve the working condition of election officers or the flow of voters at polling stations. This was obvious in the last election, with significant lineups at advance polls. On the regulatory side, the political financing regime has expanded dramatically in scope and complexity over the last decade, and yet its requirements are still mostly met by volunteers. If these volunteers contravene the Act, they may face criminal prosecution, and this remains the only form of sanction. This is out of step with modern regulatory regimes. It is time to bring the Act into the 21st century. It is possible to do so without losing any of the essential safeguards that protect electoral integrity and fairness. A key theme that you will see reflected in many of the recommendations in my report is accessibility and inclusiveness. These concepts underlie Canadians' ability to exercise their constitutional guaranteed right to vote and be a candidate. Of particular concern to me is access for voters with disabilities. Canada has ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which guarantees people with disability the right to fully and actively participate in political life. While we've made significant strides in Canada in recent years, more still needs to be done. My reports contain several recommendations aimed at removing barriers to the full electoral participation of voters with disabilities. Among them is my suggestion that Parliament provide a clear directive and a simplified approval process for Elections Canada to conduct pilot projects on voting technologies that would benefit voters with disabilities. Many of these voters rely on technology as a necessity, not just as a convenience in their daily lives. We need to explore ways to give these voters better opportunities to vote independently and in secret. I have also recommended that parties and candidates receive a higher level of reimbursement for campaign expenses they incur to accommodate voters with disability, such as providing closed caption videos or by hosting events at accessible locations with sign language interpretation. This measure would give Canadians with disability more opportunities to participate in political life. Another important group in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness are young electors, who are often hard to reach. Although the National Register of Electors includes 93% of Canadian electors overall, the average coverage of electors aged 18 to 24 is only 72%. Allowing young electors to pre-register with Elections Canada so that their registration activates on their 18th birthday would greatly improve the quality of the voter list for this demographic. Once they turn 18, these young electors would receive a voter information card during an election, telling them when and where to vote and bringing them into the electoral process. I also recommend that the voter information card be accepted as a proof of address at the poll, not as a standalone document, but together with another piece of identification. Youth, as well as other groups like seniors and Aboriginal voters, continue to experience difficulties in proving where they live when they go to vote. Allowing the voter information card to be used as proof of address, along with a second document establishing their identity, would increase access to voting for a number of electors. A final recommendation that I want to highlight under the theme of accessibility is moving the vote from Monday to a weekend day, either Saturday or Sunday. This would benefit a large number of voters who would not have to fit voting into their busy work days. Weekend voting would also make it easier to recruit election officers and allow us to use more schools and public buildings as polling places. Le deuxième thème que j'aimerais aborder est la flexibilité et
The second theme I would like to address is flexibility and effectiveness in election administration. Long lineups in the last election, particularly at advance polls, frustrated a lot of voters. This was especially true when voters arrived at their polling place and were told they had to wait in line for service at a specific table, when election officers at other tables seemed to be free. Many voters, especially youth, were surprised to see election officers striking their names off a paper list with a pencil with no computer or technology in sight. The Act is very prescriptive as to who does what, when, on which form, and in what manner at any given polling station. And the polling station is, by definition, the precise table at which each individual elector is assigned to vote. This is why voters are required to line up at one table even when others are free. I've recommended changes to allow for efficient voting operations that are scalable to local demand, take advantage of technology, and as a result are less labor-intensive. Specifically, I recommend that while the Act should continue to prescribe functions at polling places, the activities and the distribution of labor among staff at a site should take place according to instructions from the Chief Electoral Officer. And these instructions are public, by the way, and known well in advance. Other amendments are needed so that voters may vote at any table in the school gym, for example, rather than only at one place where their name is on the list. Providing election officers with a searchable voter database as opposed to paper lists would ensure that the controls prescribed by the Act remain intact. From a voter's standpoint, these changes would result in faster service in a more modern and efficient environment. And there would be two other positive outcomes. With the ability to assign tasks in a more flexible manner, working conditions for election officers would improve. Also, with a more efficient process in place, Elections Canada would be able to fully leverage the benefits of technology to electronically manage not only the voters list, but other forms and documents at the polls. Computerization, when well implemented, is a proven method of reducing record-keeping errors. It would contribute to increasing the confidence Canadians have in the integrity of voting operations. In addition, I recommend that returning officers be given more flexibility in hiring election workers. As you know, running an election is a massive undertaking. It requires some 285,000 people to be hired in a very short time frame. Over the last decade, returning officers have had difficulty finding enough qualified and eligible people to work. It would help if the Act's barriers to the timely hiring of the best people for the job could be removed. Currently, returning officers are precluded from filling many key positions until they have considered names submitted by the candidates and political parties who came first and second in the last election. While parties and candidates should continue to be encouraged to submit names of capable workers, returning officers should be able to fill these positions from any source as soon as the writs are issued. Fairness and integrity were the third theme underlying my recommendations. A final theme, touched on by many recommendations, is that of fairness and integrity. And this is particularly relevant with respect to the political finance regime. The 42nd general election was one of the longest in Canadian history, and although the election date is now fixed under Canadian law, the start of the election period is not. This creates uncertainty for political participants and allows the governing party to determine the spending cap, which is now adjusted to the length of the election. Providing a maximum length for general elections would help to reduce this uncertainty and increase fairness for all involved. Another consideration is the complexity of the political finance regime, which has increased dramatically over the last 10 years. The official agents of candidates are volunteers who work hard to meet the myriad of reporting and other requirements that are imposed under the Act. While a subsidy is provided to auditors for their work, nothing is provided to official agents. Granting official agents a modest subsidy for their work would recognize the importance of what they do. Tying the subsidy to certain requirements, such as filing returns within deadlines and participating in Elections Canada training sessions, would also improve the quality and timeliness of returns. This measure would promote transparency and encourage compliance within the regulatory regime. It is also important to uphold compliance by means that are effective and proportionate. Currently, non-compliance is addressed using a criminal process model, where those who contravene the Act's provisions are investigated by the Commissioner of Canada Elections and, if appropriate, charged with an offence. They are then tried in the criminal courts. This is a sensible process for the most serious offenders. It is, however, slow, costly, and carries a significant stigma. Many contraventions of the Act do not merit such a heavy-handed approach. Several federal and provincial regulatory regimes now use a more streamlined approach for regulatory offences, which is to impose an administrative monetary penalty. Implementing an AMP's regime would help to encourage compliance, furthering the important goals of transparency and fairness. As well, allowing the Chief Electoral Officer to administer an AMP regime would permit the Commissioner to concentrate on investigating the most significant offences under the Act. The Commissioner has made it clear that to successfully pursue offenders, he needs a number of additional tools, and I am therefore recommending them in my report. These tools include the power to compel testimony in the investigation of election offences, with attendant safeguards as required by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You may wish to ask the Commissioner to appear before you to present his views on recommendations that touch on his enforcement responsibility. I also suggest that you invite the broadcasting arbitrator who has statutory responsibilities linked to the broadcasting regime. Mr. Chairman, this completes my overview of the key themes and recommendations in my report. I strongly believe that federal election administration has reached a tipping point and that action is required now to ensure that we can continue to meet electors' expectations. Changes will have to be in place well in advance of the next election for my successor to deliver an event that is inclusive, fair, and responsive to the needs of Canadians. Mr. Chairman, I am fully aware of the number of recommendations and the scope of the recommendations that I am putting forward.
Remains available at any time to assist the committee in its work. It's also available to individual members who wish to receive a more detailed briefing on any aspect of the recommendation. If I may, considering the scope of the report and the risk of disruption by extraneous events that could happen at any time and would take precedence over your study, I would suggest that the committee organize its review around the two chapters in the narrative, and particularly Table A. We would be happy to offer a technical briefing to the committee before starting its work on Chapter 1 regarding the electoral process. Upon conclusion of your review of Chapter 1, I would suggest that maybe you consider inviting the Commissioner, of course, the Broadcasting Arbitrator, and probably also representative of the CRTC, which are three organizations that play a role in the administration of our regime. And consideration could be given into staging reports, given that the very tight agenda that exists. As various phases of the work is completed, maybe advise the government of your views on the recommendations so that they can proceed as quickly as possible in designing a proper response. So I will leave that with you, Mr. Chair, but again, rest assured that we're available to assist in any way possible in your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some very important recommendations there. The last time we did this, you provided staff for a lot of the meetings to help us through the technicalities. You're prepared to do that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. So, David, I just explained at the beginning is that the Chief Electoral, this happens after every election, and he presented us 3 reports. We're basically dealing with the third one, which has the recommendations, and it's totally separate from Electoral Reform Committee that a lot of you are on, which is another process. So we're dealing with the technicalities of the election that will fit under any system, actually, that's adopted. So we'll go to the questioning or discussions, and the first person, Ms. Vanderbilt.
Thank you.
For 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation and for this very comprehensive report and for returning to the committee once again. I am very pleased to see that you are talking about inclusiveness and about accessibility and breaking down the barriers to people voting. I'm very pleased to see for persons with disabilities, for young people, the pre-registration. The voter ID cards, I know that anecdotally many of us saw that there are people who, either Indigenous people or seniors who don't have a driver's license, or others, people experiencing homelessness, some of the most vulnerable in our population, weren't able to vote because they weren't able to use the voter information cards. Can you talk about how that would actually, do you have statistics or evidence or anything that would show the extent to which this impacted voter turnout in the last election, and how this kind of a change would actually help?
We have evidence from the labor force surveys that was conducted in October, right after the election, by Statistics Canada, showing that roughly 170,000 electors did not vote because of issues regarding their ability to establish their identity and mostly their address. It's interesting because in that survey it also shows that out of the 170,000, 50,000 showed up at the poll and were turned away for that reason. So that's the order of evidence we have at this point. We know that from past experience it has been useful for specific groups to be able to rely on the voter information card to establish their address.
And 170,000 is quite a significant number of people, especially those that were actually turned away. Would you see that allowing Elections Canada to go back to public information, public education programs, would that be something that would be included? What kind of programs do you propose, and would that be something that you would be targeting at some of these groups that face barriers in order to vote?
Yes, there is a recommendation, the report, that seeks to expand our education mandate, which is currently limited to those under age of voting. I think there are groups of eligible electors that face particular barriers and which we need to reach, particularly during the election, but also between elections, to understand better what are their needs and how can we help overcome the barriers they face on voting. So there is a recommendation to that effect in the recommendation report.
Of course, in addition to barriers to voting, there are also barriers that prevent people from becoming candidates. And of course, access to financing, access to money is typically one of these barriers, particularly for women and for other groups. But would the proposals that you have in order to shorten the length of an election campaign, or at least not go to the length that we have had, and also to add additional sanctions that are monetary sanctions, do you think that would lead to more enforcement, and do you think that would lead to candidates being able to run even if they don't have access to the money networks?
I think there's two elements there. In terms of the regime for the administrative penalty, it is designed to ensure better compliance, and better compliance not for the sake of compliance, for the sake of ensuring transparency and consistency in the administration of the law. With regard to financial barriers that candidates may face, you will see in the second part of the report, in the second chapter, some recommendations regarding, for example, child care expense claim, as well as expense claim related to supporting related disabilities. So we would recommend that the Act create some incentive, again, by reducing those barriers.
And of course, right now, enforcement takes a very, very long time. I can think of the cases where a member sat for another 6 years before being charged or convicted. So would this option of being able to impose financial penalties for those infractions that are not of a criminal nature, do you think that would speed up the compliance process and allow these things to go more quickly?
I think it would, and that's one of the reasons for such a regime. I think it would be much quicker than relying on the criminal system, because we're talking here about essentially an administrative process, which involves elements of due process, of course, but which would be much more quicker than the traditional criminal court process.
And then just my last question is to do with the voting on weekends. I know that in the past there's been a proposal that if we vote on Mondays, that we would have that be a national holiday so that people could go to the polls and participate in the election. And we all know that there are a number of volunteers that come out after 5 o'clock, and people vote after 5 o'clock because of their work schedules. But there are also a lot of people with precarious work schedules and other commitments on weekends, family commitments. So is there anything that, aside from the advance polls and the high turnout at the advance polls from other jurisdictions or in your experience, that would actually show that the turnout would be higher if we moved it to a weekend day?
First of all, there's the evidence over the last two general elections, 2011, 2015, where we had advance poll in one case on Easter weekend, and in the latest example on Thanksgiving weekend. And on both occasions, we saw record turnout for advance polls and significant increases. For the first time, we had also voting at advance poll on a Sunday in the last election, and roughly 25% of the turnout was due on that Sunday voting. So there is, again, it's early evidence, but there is evidence that electors appreciate the convenience of being able to vote on a weekend or even on a statutory holiday. That's for sure. Whether there is, I'm not sure, sorry, I lost part of your question.
Making it a national holiday.
Well, that's an option that I leave to your consideration. I didn't put it formally in the report, but it's certainly an option. Some countries have a statutory holiday.
How much time do I have?
None.
None, okay.
But could you mention which countries have voting on weekends? I think it's in your report.
Oh, there's 80 countries around the world.
80?
80, yes. About a dozen of them have it on Saturday, the rest on the Sunday. I could provide the list if the committee...
Okay, yeah, that'd be good if you provide that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm the only member of this committee, I think I'm right in saying this, who has been on this committee throughout the entire term of your service, and that gives me a chance to thank you for what has seemed to me to be a uniformly dedicated, competent, and conscientious period of service. I'm grateful. I know that the other members of the committee feel exactly the same way I do. And I have to say, I'm very sad to see you depart. I've always enjoyed the thoroughness with which you respond, in particular how you respond in your follow-ups when we ask you to provide us with additional material and documentation. That is, I think you are the most conscientious person I've encountered in that respect, having dealt with many officers of Parliament. I wanted to ask you, given that this is the last time you'll be appearing before this committee, and on the other committee I sit on, the Electoral Reform Committee, we will not have another chance to invite you back, given that our dance card is completely full. We have 2 meetings a day some days, and we don't have any more space for witnesses. So this is it. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, if you would be willing to come back in the future, once you've moved on to other challenges in life, as Mr. Kingsley has done, to provide expert testimony, particularly with regard to this particular report you've developed, which is unlikely to be dealt with in a year, but also with other matters.
Yes. Of course, I'd be happy to do so if the committee wishes to invite me again. Yes, as a private citizen. Who knows, you may get different views.
Right. Well, but I mean, it also allows a bit more freedom. I recognize there are some formal constraints on you that you've been very careful to honor, in addition to those that are provided just by, I think, your careful nature that might be removed, and that would be valuable to us. So, all right. I wanted to ask you about some questions that relate to several things. First of all, to testimony you gave before the Electoral Reform Committee last July. And secondly, with relation to, you did mention these items briefly in your, or the general subject matter at any rate, briefly in your report on the 42nd election. At that time, in July, I had asked, and a number of other members of the committee had asked about the feasibility of conducting a referendum on electoral reform, given the tight timeline, the potential for redistribution under some of the models that are proposed, and so on. And I know, and you submitted a very thorough response to that. Those who say that a referendum cannot take place on electoral reform, as opposed to those who say it should not take place, have tended to provide a couple of arguments, one of which is that Elections Canada is not in a position to administer a referendum administratively. You responded a bit to that back July, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to find out whether that is, in fact, the case or not the case. Back in July, you stated in response to a question from me that I can confirm with the committee we've started to develop contingency plans, trying to identify what would need to be done. And you pointed out, of course, that a referendum has not been held since 1992. We've started to identify work that needs to be pursued. Have you made further progress in that regard?
We have advanced our contingencies in that regard. We haven't done any public activities to suggest that we are actually getting ready. So that's why I insisted at the time, I would insist again today, that we need a 6 months notice.
Yes.
Because there's several procurement activities, for example, that needs to take place. But otherwise, we have continued to refine what I call a contingency plan, describing in more details what needs to be done if we were to run a referendum by the spring, I guess.
Right. You mentioned in response to a question from Gérard Deltel at that meeting that you need to redo the training manuals for election staff. Obviously, that, and you mentioned this is necessary in order to train the 255,000 Canadians who administer elections. I assume a similar number for referenda. And you estimated that about 15 computer systems would need to be adapted. Have you been able to do any work in that regard?
Just again identifying the tasks to be performed, but we have not actually started to carry those tasks. The first thing that needs to be done is updating the regulation under the Referendum Act. That's
yes.
The very first thing that needs to be done, because that sets out the specific task. and the variance that exists with the normal conduct of an election. So that would be the top priority for Elections Canada, is to bring that regulation up to date. It hasn't been in the last 10 years. It has been once in the last 10 years, so it needs to be revised, updated, and tabled before Parliament.
Right. Well, you in fact did an update to one aspect of the Act where you drafted the regulations that were then approved by Ordinary Council in 2010.
Yep.
How much time would be required for you to do a similar update if you were asked? Or indeed, could you do so proactively? Those are really two questions. Maybe I'll let you sort
I
that.
think we would need to have it in place very early on when the notice is given, because it's a key instrument that determine, again, what will go into those manuals that needs to be developed for the training of poll officials.
Mm-hmm.
1 minute, Mr. Reid.
Also, there's a tariff of fees which appears not to have been updated since 1992, but I went through the Act and it appears to me that under Section 542, Sub 1 of the Act, that is done on your recommendation. The Governor and Council makes the actual regulation, but I gather they are not empowered to do so unless you make a recommendation. Would you be in a position simply to incorporate the fees that exist under the Elections Act for those purposes, or would it require more than that?
The time, I think it would be the likely approach, is that as far as the tasks are similar under an election or a referendum, we would propose the same tariff. And again, unless there is changes to the Referendum Act, it would be carried very much in the same framework as an election. So
Yes.
it would make sense to use the same tariff to a very large extent.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Reid. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Mr. Christofferson.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. Mayran. I would just correct my friend Scott Reid. There are actually two of us that have served under the full tenure of Monsieur Mayran. However, the distinction is that while Mr. Reid is prepared to give you thanks, and he formed government on your watch, I'm prepared to give you thanks, and we never won a damn thing under your watch. So it just goes to show you that I'm still here, yeah, but that wasn't the plan. We were going to be over there. But you've just done a fantastic job, and I hope that the House, and I'm sure we will, Chair, get an opportunity to thank you properly. And as someone who has been here for all your time, but also as someone who's done at least 6 or 7 international election observation missions in other countries, in emerging democracies around the world, I can tell colleagues and Canadians how blessed we are to have someone of your caliber and your professionalism and your international renown and respect to be at the head of our elections. We're proud of our election system, no matter what some governments try to do to it. And you've just been a class act, sir, all the way through, and I thank you very much for your service to our country on behalf of our citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to move on to just mention that I said this in camera. I don't think I'm divulging anything. I enjoy this exercise. It's a long, tedious exercise, but I have to say what I enjoy as someone who's been in public life now for over three decades. Even I choke on that. Over 3 decades. You know, the Punch and Judy show, for those who might get that reference, gets old quick. What really is exciting and stimulating, I find, is when all of us set aside our party membership card and we focus on one effort and problem solving. And given that the nature of our election laws are about making sure it's fair, it's not a partisan exercise. We bring our personal partisan experience, but in the main, the process involves all of us trying to make sure that we have a process that is as fair as possible to all the parties, all the candidates, that all citizens get to participate. And it's challenging to find that, and I find that very stimulating. And given the group that I've gotten to know on this committee, I look forward to a very stimulating exercise in trying to improve and keep our system as fair as it can possibly be. I always use most of my time clearing my throat. Just how much time do I have left?
used 3 minutes.
All right, good, thanks. Okay, two items I wanted to raise. I'm so glad to see the VIC in there, the voter identification card, given what we went through in the last round, struggling to keep this thing alive. And let me just say again, you know, the lie was put out that the thing couldn't be trusted, and yet we had evidence time after time after time from experts that it is arguably the most up-to-date piece of information that Canadians can have in terms of their current address, for the simple reason that... Did I lose my mic? Am I that loud? You got to put them on the other side of the room. So where was I? Oh yeah, the VIX, and so it has actually access to all the major database centers in the country, the health centers, the driver's license, income tax. So it was frustrating as heck going around the last time having this argument that there were problems with it, when the reality is it's the most up-to-date, accurate piece of information that we can have. So I'm so glad you're bringing that back because it confused people in the last election, and I submit it was meant to be that way, and I say that straight up. A lot of that stuff was meant to slow things down, cause frustration, and make people either stay home or go home. And I'm so glad that we're back hopefully on a more positive track. One question I wanted to ask, I looked a couple of times, I didn't see it. Another one of the bugaboos that's in this, in our current law, is that the federal parties, mine included, all the federal parties can submit their subsidy requests, and 50, 60 million comes to mind, no receipts required. I'm assuming that we're going to close that loophole somewhere in here, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, there is a recommendation. I'm not sure if it's in chapter 2 or... But there is a recommendation.
Okay, I thought so. I couldn't find, because it also links with the issue of, and just cut me off, Chair, when my time comes, as I know you'll do, is compelling testimony. Again, you know, you can take an investigation only so far, but if you tell the police, and as a former Solicitor General, I know a bit about this too, is that if you tell the police they can't force and compel at the end of the day, or the courts to compel to get a testimony, how far you're really going to get in terms of any investigation. So, and we saw evidence time and time again of people who refused to be interviewed, refused to give answers, and no ability on the part of our officials to compel them to give that testimony. So again, simple things like receipts to back up your request for tens of millions of dollars of taxpayer money seems to me to be something that we should fix. The fact that if there's an investigation going on, that there needs to be the ability to compel testimony is something that I hope that we close off and improve. So, and I just want to mention too, if I got time, I like your idea of the interim reports, because this can go on a while. Like I said, it's tedious. It can go on a while, and there may be merit, Chair, in us looking at breaking it off into chunks that we could then forward to the government, hopefully for their consideration to be putting, or to the House, and then on to the government for their consideration to start putting into legislation. So, and I think that's your goal, is that we'll, rather than wait for the whole thing, all or nothing, let's get what we can in chunks and pieces, get it enacted, and at the same time we keep working here. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this exercise. I want to begin where or end where I began, in thanking you, sir, sincerely for all that you've done for Canada. It has made a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sure the committee agrees with all the commendations, all the members of the committee. So thank you. Just following up on David's last point, though, I think you have broken it into logical pieces for the committee to do. Can you just repeat those separations in your report?
Basically, there is what we call the narrative, which consists of 2 chapters. One deals with the electoral process, and that's where you will find the recommendation around modernization, inclusiveness, accessibility. The second chapter of the narrative deals with the regulatory regime, mainly political financing. That's where you will find the provision that deal with various aspects of, I would point out, broadcasting needs to be updated, as well as the power of the commissioners and the administrative penalty regime that we propose. Table B sets out a number of substantive recommendations that I believe deserve your attention, your consideration, and your study, but that did not necessarily fit easily in part A. The third The third table you'll find is Table C, which basically a list of technical minor amendments that are more meant for PCO and drafters at Justice. My view is that there's no substantive policy issues involved, but we need to harmonize language from sometimes or clarify a point here and there, but there's no substantive impact, I would say, policy impact.
So we could do an interim report on the recommendations in Table A,
Yes.
and then another one, give it to the government, and then do another one on Table B,
Yes.
and the last one's administrative.
Yeah. So,
Make sense? Okay. Mr. Graham, please, for 7 minutes.
Merci d'être ici. Je veux
Thank you. Thanks for coming, and I'd like to thank you for your excellent work during your mandate. I think we're all proud of you. Now, in A2, you recommend that to use electronic lists so that an individual be able to vote at any polling station. Why would that be restricted to a polling station? I'm sorry, the sound wasn't very good. Now, we're talking about an electronic list, and that would be, in fact, the electoral list that would be available at all polling stations. So it would be the list for the whole country available at each polling station. And what we're recommending is that rather than doing it by table, that you do it for a whole series of tables in that polling station, so that when a voter comes to vote, if they have their voter information card, there's a barcode that can be scanned, and then that links up with the electronic list. And as that voter moves through the process, its name, that person's name is crossed off, and then they've indicated when and where they voted. And the advantage to that, besides for the voting books, is that a person can use the first table that becomes free. It's sort of like the banking system or going to a bank. So you go to a teller who's free. It's a bit obsolete right now. We shouldn't necessarily have to wait for the one specific table that's freed up. So we want that flexibility within that polling place. Now, yes, we could go further than that. And perhaps over the course of the discussions, you'll listen to other experts who will give you information on that. But quite possibly, a voter could go to another polling place within a riding or even within the country. So I think there are various issues that would have to be considered. So do you think there would be any paper record that would be kept that you could look at, just in case, for example, there's any sort of mistake in the software? So, for example, if I show up, then my name would be recorded. Yes, things could be printed out. Yes, definitely. But I would just like to point out, we're not talking about electronic voting. We're keeping the paper voting, the paper ballot. Now, the other possibility is that as voters' names are crossed off, and then that information becomes available to, for example, the various candidates so that people know who voted and where. So no more bingo cards, for example. No, we'd have this electronic system that would be accessible if you had the right PIN number. Obviously, there would have to be the right checks and balances for that. But in real time, then, you would know what's happening within these polling stations throughout the riding. Now, the other possibility, or the other recommendation rather, is to have names of those who are, say, 16 or 17. But why 16 or 17? Why wouldn't there would be a list and your name would be on that list at birth? Well, we don't have access to all the data, all the birth records, and just to give you an idea of the context, a few years ago, our main departments had access to that kind of information. For example, driver's license bureaus, various agencies. So they have access to the names of those who are 16 or 17 years old, those who are starting to drive and make money, etc. At one point, though, there was an examination of the privacy implications of collecting that kind of information. So what we're recommending, is that we would have access to the data, but for the purposes of registering 16 and 17-year-olds on the register. And that would be also done in combination with some sort of public education campaign. And that way, when they reach voting age, they would automatically be informed of, for example, their polling station, etc., during an election. And I think that would significantly improve the coverage of young people. You suggest subsidies for elections agents. How do you think that would work? Well, we already have ways of doing this in terms of reimbursing expenses, etc. We also have a process for auditors. So when, for example, auditors receive a subsidy for those electoral returns, for examining those electoral returns, we would use the same kinds of mechanisms for official agents. Obviously, there would be certain conditions attached to that. The return would have to be timely and complete. We would also like that subsidy to be tied to the official agent having followed the appropriate training. So they would then receive that subsidy that would vary depending on the receipts and expenses, etc. One last question. What advice would you give your successor?
Of advice. I think what I've tried to do throughout my terms has been really focusing and looking at bringing everything from the perspective of electors. There's two main considerations, what I think we do, and I think the electors have to be at the center of anything we do, as well as the greatest consideration for fairness for all. And I think if you keep to those two things, you cannot do too much wrong. With a few other tips, you could do very well.
Merci, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Now we're on to Mr. Reid for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, my apologies to Mr. Christopherson. I can't imagine how as memorable an experience as 10 years serving on a committee with him slipped my mind.
No, I'm committee. I'm in the House.
Oh, in the House. Okay, fair enough. That's memorable too, actually. I wanted to, if I could, return to something, Mr. Miron, you said in your testimony before the Electoral Reform Committee back in July. You indicated in your opening statements at that time, and I'm quoting you here, I note the government has committed to having legislation in May 2017, which I'm comfortable with. And I've wanted to ask you what you mean by this. You can see why this is important as the House tries to move forward to deal with the legislation. Do you mean by this, as long as the legislation is completed, no further amendments are possible, which in practice means either it's through both the House and the Senate and has royal assent, or at least it's through the House and is unlikely to be amended by the Senate? Or do you mean something lesser? We have the broad parameters. We now know it's MMP and not STV. I'll let you try to respond to that.
Again, depending on what comes out, certainly my preference is that the bill would advance enough. It's been through committees, been reviewed, discussed. There's at least at the report stage, and hopefully I've received third reading in the House, at least. Because we need certainty. Depending on the scope of the changes, it may be very significant, and we need a degree of certainty, maybe not absolute, but a certain degree of certainty so that we can embark on the preparation that cannot be delayed unduly.
One of the problems that has become evident from witness testimony at the Elections Reform Committee has been that certain kinds of changes to the system, I don't want to suggest all of them, but certain kinds would potentially have to go before the Supreme Court for a reference. For example, if you increase the number of seats in the House as a way of achieving some kind of additional list system, there's been suggestions to add, for example, 15% to the House. That might affect the proportionate representation of the provinces, which is guaranteed under Section 53, if I'm not mistaken, of the Constitution Act 1867. And you'd want to be sure before you proceed that that's acceptable. So it is conceivable that you'd have a situation in which you need to submit a reference case to the Supreme Court, and they obviously take some time to respond back. If this were layered on top of your attempts to change things, when you're in a situation where you conceivably could start making changes and then discover they can't go forward, I don't need you to tell me this would be a problem, but the question is, how much of a problem? Is it a catastrophic problem, or is it something that can still be sorted out?
It may lead to sunk cost, as we say in the jargon, in the sense that we have to rely on a proposal to do anything, and the best proposal would be what have been submitted to Parliament and hopefully endorsed, let's say, at third reading in our scenario. So we would have to begin some work and advance the work that absolutely needs to be done if we want to be able to run the new system for 2019. With the full understanding, and it's not new, we see that from time to time where legislation is disputed on the basis of constitutional challenges. We've seen that for citizens abroad in the last election, or even on the ID requirement. There were cases. So in those situations, we have to be ready for a possible scenario that may result from a court ruling. So we need to take that contingency into due consideration. It did happen for a citizen residing abroad, where the first instance court did rule in a certain way. We made changes to respect the court ruling, and suddenly the Court of Appeal, just before the election, changed course, reversed the decision. So we had to revert back. So, but that's, I'm not sure how else we can deal with those situations. We need to be ready and agile enough to adjust quickly if sudden events occur.
All right. I don't have enough time. I'll come back in the third round with additional questions.
Good. Thank you. Ms. Pettypass-Taylor, please.
Thank you very much for coming today to respond to our questions. We truly appreciate it. In your report, you said that computerization could be a key tool to reduce mistakes, and it would contribute to increasing trust on the part of Canadians. They would trust the voting system. So how would you do that? How would you set up this computerized system? And how could we have it in time for the next election? Well, if these recommendations are accepted, if the government decides to introduce legislation for that or implement it, then yes, I could foresee it happening for the next election. We feel that there are many ways in which we can reduce paper within polling stations and within all procedures. And we also think that the various tasks of election workers can be alleviated. There's no reason why we can't have intelligent type forms today. And so that you can, be able to move on to, say, another question on a form, just even if you haven't answered the previous question. We should be able to have better record keeping, better file keeping within polling stations, for example, and they would be computerized. I was a new candidate, and I couldn't believe the amount of paperwork that we had within our office, so I'm very happy to hear you say this. Well, you'll see that there are recommendations also for nomination campaigns and leadership campaigns, etc., so that we do more online. I'm very pleased to hear that.
To reiterate a bit of the comments that Mr. Christofferson had indicated, that I was really pleased to see that some of the recommendations were to reverse the ban of using voter ID information cards as a form of identification. Could you perhaps outline or elaborate on the importance of the voter information card, and could you describe how its use as identification could impact some groups of Canadians, perhaps Canadians in remote areas, people that are in long-term care group facilities, or even our Indigenous communities?
The voter information card is the main instrument through which electors find out when is the election, when can I vote, and where do I go to vote. That's the essential piece of document that's sent to each and every elector across the country that is registered. We find, with regard to identification requirements, we find that there are groups of people that are more challenged when it comes time to prove their address, which is a requirement, I should mention, that is very exceptional around the world. There's very few jurisdictions that have a requirement to establish address. And even in Canada, there's only 2 or maybe 3 provinces, 3 jurisdictions that require it. The federal level is the only one that does not accept either a note or the voter card as an alternative to a proof of address. We're the only one in that regard. It is particularly significant for Aboriginal living on reserve who do not have address. In many cases, there's no addressing system there. Yet, often we will have visited those reserve and knocked at door and registered those people, so we know that where they are living. Similarly with seniors, and I think given the demographic trends and the aging of our population, I think the problem is going to be to get larger, not lesser. We have many seniors that live in senior homes where, again, we do enumeration at those senior homes and we leave a form with them telling them we've seen you and you're registered. Yet those people often don't have documents with them. It's left with their family members or those who take care of them. And we've seen incidents where people were not allowed to vote because they did not have any of the documents authorized under the legislation. Allowing the VIC or the voter information card or the form we leave with seniors as a piece of ID establishing their address would help resolve that problem. I would point out also that, because it's something I care greatly, I think for seniors it's important to recognize that most of them have voted all their life. Voting is important to them, and it's the one act that they can do on their own very often, depending what's your stage in life. And I think the solution that relies on attestation does not respect the dignity of our seniors. And I think, again, having that document, which is issued by an official authority, would give, I think, would be more respectful of their dignity.
Merci. How much time do I have?
None.
None. Okay.
Very long answer.
Mr. Reid, please.
Thank you again. The analogy that was coming to my mind during your last response was, your last response to a question from me was, if a plane doesn't have enough fuel to return both to its original point or to its destination, it hits a point of no return. And I'm really asking, is such a thing imaginable in the situation of starting to work towards a new system, in the context of dealing with a reference to establish the constitutional validity of the new model? And I'm emphasizing this primarily in the connection with models that involve adding ridings to provinces, although it could come up in other situations as well. Is there a point of no return at which you've got a problem? You can't simply abort your landing and return to your point of origin, which of course is first past the post, under such a scenario?
I think I've mentioned on several occasions we need at least 2 years. And 2 years from 2009 brings us to in 2017. I've indicated and I've relied on the commitment of the government to introduce and have legislation in place by, I believe, next spring. I think after next June, June 2017, my successor will get very anxious and nervous about being able to conduct an election under a significantly changed system.
Right.
So Again, there's still time, but the time is short, no doubt.
And obviously, all the questions I've raised regarding a Supreme Court reference as to constitutionality apply with regard to a referendum as well, because the real problem from your perspective is having certainty as to which direction to start traveling in.
Yes, and again, I indicated in previous testimony that a referendum would have to be held essentially by no later than the end of next spring. So we're talking latest June next year, 2017. And in order to get there for Elections Canada to get ready, we need a 6 months notice. So again, it's very tight, but we're still within the timelines.
All right.
Critical milestone for me will be the report from your committee on that. That would give us a sense of the consensus, the type of system that's being considered. So at least we can prepare some contingency again, start thinking more clearly about what are the scenarios.
Appreciate that. One of the problems we have is that when she was asked, the minister came before our committee the day after you attended, and she was asked directly by, I think it was by Elizabeth May, if the committee makes a recommendation, will the cabinet follow that recommendation as to system? And the minister's response was, we'll take it into consideration. So the practical difficulty we have is, unless the government alters its position and says, no, we will accept the committee's recommendation, you won't be certain as to which direction we're going in until the actual draft legislation is produced, which, as I understand, would be taking place no earlier than when the House resumes sitting in last day of January, first day of February, something like that. I just think that is actually the conundrum that you're likely to face, unless unless the cabinet proactively indicates prior to December 1st that they will accept the recommendation of the committee, full stop.
You're absolutely right, I think, but the committee and the reaction of the government to the report of the committee will be indicative of future direction, at least. Right now, I don't know, and we don't have any. At least if there is a system that's being contemplated seriously, an alternative system, at least we can start doing some contingency around it and begin to understand what it actually means in terms of delivery. But at this point, there's too much on the table. This would be a useless effort in my mind.
I have no more time except once again to say how much, speaking personally this time, how much I appreciate your outstanding service over the past decade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Just before we go to the next questioner, does the witnesses need a break, washroom break or coffee or anything?
Got a bit of water.
Maybe you can go and ask them if they want coffee or tea or anything. Okay, Mr. Chan, please, for 5 minutes.
Great. I was going to suggest that we take a break. I know you've gone a solid hour. It's up to you, David. I think the only last two on the speakers list is yourself and myself. I think I've got the last 5-minute round, and you've got 3 minutes. I just want to give members of the committee an opportunity to go grab lunch. If you want to just keep plowing through to 1 o'clock, I'm good either way.
Actually, we're just going to 12:45 because
we're going to 12:45. We're doing committee business. Scott, how do you want to do this? Want to just keep going?
I'll go along with whatever the majority wants.
I was just suggesting.
Well,
if our witnesses are fine with continuing to go straight through to 12:45, then we shall do so. Okay, let's carry on then. That was just my suggestion. I wanted to simply chime in along with all of my other colleagues and simply to say, Mr. Mayron, and to your colleagues from the Chief Elections Officers, from Elections Canada, thank you for all of your work and for your service these past 9 years. As the Chief Electoral Officer, I really think that this report and the other two reports that you tabled are a testament really to your service to our country, and I want to thank you as well. And I'm particularly heartened as I went through this report in terms of all of the recommendations and suggestions. I really think that the point that you made, that at the heart of it, it really is about fairness for electors and for Canadian citizens, it really is, the report really does reflect that. And I personally have very little that I find that I couldn't endorse in terms of moving forward. I do have one specific, very pet project that was referred to in your report as it related to electoral district associations. And I just wanted to probe you briefly on that particular point. I support, I think, the decision previously to bring EDAs under greater scrutiny under the Elections Act. But I do have some problems, at least under the way it's currently administered or the way in which sanctions are applied. And I just want your thoughts on that. And the situation I'm basically dealing with, so I do agree that there needs to be greater transparency, and the current system, I think, does achieve that. But my concern relates that sometimes that the actual practice of what actually goes on within EDAs and the sanctions that are potentially applied to them may not in fact match. And let me give you the situation. Sometimes, and this happens within political parties, and I'm sure my colleagues would see that this situation can arise, that sometimes a transition even between candidates or between riding associations are not always easy transitions. I'll leave it in the diplomatic vernacular. But sometimes in the requirement to actually file the EDA's returns, it's often not in the control of the new riding association. And yet the sanctions that are applied right now would be either deregistration of the riding association, which essentially penalizes the current individuals in control of the riding association, or it's the loss of the ability to issue tax receipts. And I don't see, and so instead of the sanctions apply to the riding association as opposed to the individuals who are actually under control and would have had information about the activities of, let's say, a previous riding association. Do you think that there is still a gap in terms of how that reporting takes place and how sanctions would be applied?
Would deserve a much longer discussion than we can have in this forum. There are still offenses under the Act for those individuals involved. As I mentioned, these are criminal offenses, so not the best, the most suitable. We could look, or this committee could look at the legislation to see whether there's a need to reinforce the responsibility, statutory responsibility of the officers in charge of the EDAs at the time. But again, the Act considers that unless you deregister the EDA, that it's the same entity that continues from the perspective of the legislation, from the perspective of transparency of financial transaction. It's the same entity, and the Act does not distinguish whether there's been a new board or a new management at the EDA. The best way in those cases, maybe, I say that with great caution, maybe to deregister the association, but you still need to file a final report of that association and register anew. It is a problem in the system, the fact that it relies very significantly on volunteers, I think is a big factor in all this. I'm not sure. We could look at ways of making it a little bit more effective and fair again.
Again, I think the suggestions and other provisions dealing with giving you greater powers, so it's not just through criminal enforcement, but through the sanction of a fine or something like that, I think might at least provide you greater flexibility, and yet at the same time give Canadians confidence in transparency in reporting. I mean, I'm struggling with a particular instance where I can't get my hands on certain decisions of a previous electoral district association, yet I'm under my association's under the compulsory requirement to file for transactions of which I had no control and have no detail. And yet I bear the consequence of the way the Act is currently set up.
The association, yes. Indirectly.
Indirectly.
Right.
Thank you,
I just simply tabled that point.
Thank you, Mr. Chen.
Yep.
Mr. Christopherson for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. just two things. I didn't really you comment at the end. I only got 3 minutes. What can I do? But I wanted to mention on the provide a subsidy to the official agents who complete Elections Canada training and file the returns. That is a growing job. I'm so glad that you're starting to concentrate on that. I mean, Tyler Crosby behind me here, my staffer, was my campaign manager, and for all intent and purposes, nobody worked harder than him, hopefully with the exception of me, but nobody worked harder than him. But I got to tell you, the chief financial officer afterwards, the campaign, it is flat out. No one sees it. It's a thankless job. You make a mistake, the seat's on the line. It's huge. And Richard McKinnon is my guy now, and we can't give him a subsidy, but I can give him a shout out and tell him thanks. And every one of us has someone like that who gives a big part of their life. And quite frankly, they got to be like really, really competent, high-functioning people who get it. It's not child's play. So I'm really glad to see you moving on that one. And the last thing I wanted to mention was, notwithstanding the fact that more and more we're seeing evidence that referendums are not necessarily the magic elixir to every question in front of a democratic nation, we should at least have a referendum that works if we need it. And I got to tell you, the thing right now is not in any kind of condition, really, to conduct a modern referendum. And I just want to say, Chair, a lot of work was done, and Mr. Reid, of course, was here then, during the minority governments. And we spent a lot of time doing good work on referendum, on prorogation, for instance. And I just wanted to mention to colleagues that if we do start to look at the Referendum Act, rather than reinvent the wheel, there's an awful lot of that good, basic, foundational work. Experts from constitutional experts, other people like Monsieur Mayrand, and it's there and available. But anybody who thinks right now that we can just say, hey, let's have a referendum and pull it off the shelf and that we've got a state-of-the-art, fair referendum process that works is mistaken. So I just leave that with the committee. Maybe your thoughts on how much work does it need to be state-of-the-art and something that would reflect the kind of referendum process we would like to have.
Well, it certainly needs an update just to reflect all the changes over the last decade and a bit more, well, since 1992, all the changes that have occurred in the electoral process itself, the electoral legislation, because the two are closely interdependent. The other question for this committee, it's not for Elections Canada, but certainly for this committee, is to consider whether in this modern age there's alternatives in how we run a referendum. I understand that in BC they run plebiscite by mail. I understand that in PEI next month they will be running a plebiscite online and by phone. So there's nothing of those modern alternatives that's available under our federal statute, which causes significant cost to a federal referendum. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we finished 2 rounds, so I'm just going to open it up if any committee members have any further questions. Mr. Chen.
I wanted to follow up on another matter, and it just really relates to with respect to costs. So a lot of the proposals that you've put in here, so I'll give one example, such as extending the voting hours to at advanced polls, so moving it earlier from, let's say, noon to 9 o'clock. One thing that, to me, doesn't give me a sense, and I guess this would be tabled through your estimates, is what would the potential incremental costs be for each of the particular proposals that you have within some all these changes. As I said, I think most of these changes are really, really good, but I think it's also fair and transparent to Canadians to have a sense of what those incremental costs might be, just so that we have a sense of its potential impact. That was one question. The second question I just wanted to table quickly related to just, and this wasn't covered in your report, but I wanted to get your thoughts, given that you've been administering this act now for nearly a decade, with respect, and of course the changes took place before you became the Chief Elections Officer, but the consequences of the elimination of the voter enumeration system and with the establishment of the permanent voters lists. And, you know, I mean, your report, I think, indirectly deals with some of the challenges, such as new voter registration, particularly for those that are turning 18, and of course new Canadians, particularly those that, for example, may not be filing income taxes, or those without fixed addresses. And I wanted to just get your thoughts in terms of the efficacy of the current system and the participation rates of those under the new permanent voters list, as opposed to, because occasionally you get complaints from voters saying, look, there used to be voter enumeration in every election. I recognize it was a very expensive system, but on the same token, there was confidence that the people who lived in your electoral district were picked up in that enumeration process and could exercise their franchise. And there's a lot less of that uncertainty as to whether you're on the voters list.
There's certainly a range of views on that issue. I can speak of our experience. First of all, we need not to forget that we still do enumeration during an election campaign. We do it in a targeted fashion in neighborhood with high mobility and all these things. We do targeted revision on reserve, for example. So there is still a form of enumeration taking place for exactly the reasons you mentioned, is the people that are highly mobile and or hard to reach. So we'll do enumeration there. One of the reasons, and I think my colleagues across the country at the provincial level would agree, is that it's increasingly difficult to reach out to people through enumeration. We often knock at the door, but nobody answers. People are busy. They have different schedule. There's a challenge about recruiting workers to do that kind of work. Even StatsCan is moving away from those surveys. The other thing is that many staff, and it's unfortunate, but in many cases we can't find staff for security reasons who would go into certain neighborhood. Yet it's probably where neighborhood that would most benefit. So as an alternative, we have the permanent register. What we did last time around also is launch our online registration service, so that allows any Canadian at any time from at their convenience to add themselves to the register or change their address. For example, they just moved recently. And of course, from looking at a cost perspective, it is the National Register is a permanent list is much cheaper than enumeration. Yes, we lose the contact with electors. One way to offset that maybe is to beef up the education program, civic education program that exists. I just want to take up one point. You inquire about the cost, which is absolutely legitimate. Of course, many of those recommendations don't bring any additional costs. Some of them bring extra costs. For example, of course, opening advanced polls for longer. We estimate it's probably $500,000 an hour to open those polls. So, with what we're proposing, we're talking about $6 million per election. Civic education, registering youth under 16, 17 would also have a cost. It's very preliminary, but we estimate that's between 5 and 10 million. We estimate that there would be the first round would be more expensive. When the system is stabilized, it's a regular program, the cost would come down. So these would be the main, the larger cost increase caused by those recommendations. Otherwise, of course, I can't speak for modernization. Now technology at the poll will be something else, but until we have devised the system, it would be premature to suggest.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions related to recommendations 21 through 24, which is maximum length for an election period, allowing appointment of returning officers from outside the riding, and so forth. My question is, why would we, and why do we limit preparation of hiring to the RIP period? Could we not have that all set up in the weeks and months leading up to an election, now that we know when the elections are going to take place?
If we have certainty about the election period, that would make it easier. There are some staff, returning officer, their key staff are trained before the writ is issued, of course. The 285,000, however, we can hardly train them much in advance because they need to know when they will be available and if they are available. But the earlier, the better. And that's why we put those recommendations, not wait until the night before advance poll open to train people, which happens too often. Right. So we need to... the other advantage of what we're proposing is that we would be able to specialize a task for a poll official so that their curriculum of learning would be somewhat narrower than what they have to do now. So hopefully that will help them perform their functions.
In the same spirit, knowing the elections are going to take place on a specific date, aside from legislation, so we could change this, what is stopping us from sending out our overseas ballots months ahead and having that whole process stretched out to be much easier for overseas voters to participate?
Can do it to the
They can register. They have to register, and normally on the year of an election, we will contact and we will issue pamphlets inviting citizens overseas to register. That's the first thing they have to do. When the election is called, we will issue the ballot kits. So we do a bit of work prior to the writ, but again, not enough of them are registered. So that's another thing.
But your recommendation is that they can pull the forms off now electronically so that they don't have to wait to get it in the mail, David. That's a recommendation.
Yes, and in fact, the changes we're recommending is that they could download the ballot electronically and send it back to us with their own envelopes. Rather than having to wait to receive a kit from Elections Canada, they could save that, that time. So they could download the ballot, registered online, download your ballot, send it back according to the procedure that have been described on the site.
Earlier on, we talked about the use of one polling station to vote at any table. And in the recommendation, you mentioned the need to perhaps put the poll numbers on the back of the votes. Would that be at print time, or when the RO signs the back of the vote, would you then also write the poll number? How do you see that?
We would have to look into that in more details. This thing is suggested as a way to ensure that you continue to have poll-by-poll results. One of the downside of allowing people to move around in terms of voting is that you may not get as granular a result as your candidates and parties like to have. An option to proceed ahead and preserve the poll-by-poll result would be to ensure that the ballots indicate the polls to which the ballot. And the way also is to use scanners. So, and it is something, if the committee agrees, we would be ready to do a technical briefing on these aspects of the modernization. We've done one with political parties recently. It went quite well. And I think it would inform your discussion as you start looking at the recommendations.
Okay. You're talking also about the ability to do pilot projects. If you wanted to do a pilot project of that, what is the process you'd have to go through, just in brief?
Currently?
Yeah, if you wanted to say in the next by-election, we have some that are coming, you want to try these things, what would the process to actually make it happen?
There's two types of pilot, just to be clear. Yeah. One that involves a change to the Elections Act, and one that does not involve a change to the Elections Act. I'll give you the best example. Opening a special ballot office in campuses across the country did not require changes to the Act, but we did a pilot on it in the last election. If the pilot requires a change to the Act, we need to present a business case, a proposal to this committee, get your approval to proceed. We need to redraft the legislation to reflect what the pilot will be about, and understandably, we will report to the committee afterwards. If it involves, it would also, I will also have to run the same process in the Senate. And you can appreciate that two committees looking at the same proposal may have different views, different requirements, different and understandably, and also may have very different timelines. So That's why I'm saying that we're just talking about a pilot to test something. In my view, the approval of this committee should be sufficient for again, for testing a change. Right now, and if it deals, in fact, there's another tier, if it deals with the electronic voting, it does require not only two committees' approval, but the whole of Parliament to approve the pilot. So by the time we're ready to run the pilot, the election is gone. So, so there's practical consideration that I'm putting forward.
Thank you. Mr. Schmale.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments today. They are greatly appreciated. Just something, maybe clarification for me. We had talked a few moments ago about potentially moving Election Day from Monday to possibly on a weekend, and maybe this is where the clarification comes in. Given the fact that advanced polls take place usually over the weekend and offer a flexibility of hours, and then we had almost 70% voter turnout nationally in 2015. Was this more to help with the hiring of competent staff, or what was the objective of that?
There's three considerations. Of course, ease of recruiting qualified people to do the work would be easier on the weekend. Having access also to facilities. Right now, the challenge that returning officers have in securing schools for voting is tremendous. Increasingly, school boards, for reasons of security, will not allow voting procedure to take place during school day. So one option to deal with this is to move to the Saturday or Sunday. The other thing is that there is evidence that about half of the voters, the electors who did not vote, we're talking 8 million people did not vote in the last election, about 50% pointed out that it was due to everyday life issues that they were facing on voting day. Many of them were suggesting that they had conflict with their work schedule. So we think that these voters, these electors, would have been able to vote. So we're talking of a population probably around 1 million electors who would benefit directly from that measure. So these are the three reasons why we're pursuing this.
Thank you. And your recommendation A17 in potentially removing the signature requirement to keep the process moving along for long lines. I guess in order to do that, you would have to have, as you pointed out here, the barcode scanner in order to ensure that that person is, because I find even today you still have to sign for certain things. So I think one more check.
Yes. Okay, it's a very valid point. This is for electors that are properly registered and show up at advanced poll with their ID and their voter information card. If you're not registered or if you need to change your registration, you would still have to sign the forms or the traditional forms that you have to fill in those cases. It's really to deal with the mainstream electors who come up with their ID, their voter information card, they are at the right place. Then currently you have to search the registry, the paper, you have to enter into a book by hand, the name, the address, and you have to have it signed. If it takes 2 minutes and you're the 10 or 15 electors in line, you're already 30 minutes late. So I think that's the purpose of this recommendation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Pepitas-Taylor and then Mr. King.
Very quickly, I guess it's hard to believe that last year at this time we were in full election mode, working very hard, all of us. And we also remember that it was a 78-day campaign that we had. I guess a quick question, can you describe the consequences, if any, of extended election periods we experienced like last year?
Well, I can certainly speak for Elections Canada. I won't speak for candidates and campaign, but the main thing is that we had, and that is a challenge, and I'm sure you've faced the same thing with your volunteers, to retain people on board for twice the normal length of a campaign is a challenge, and many ROs, returning officers, face that challenge. We had people who could not be available for the extra month, so that changed all your preparation, your training, your readiness. You also, for another very concrete example, is that we constantly monitor or maintain an inventory of sites across the country. Normally, we're looking for sites available for about 36, 40 days, suddenly 78 days that's needed. So landlords were not willing anymore to enter into those leases. So either you renegotiate or find another place. So, and that happened to a large extent. So these are, I guess, not insignificant administrative impact. Most importantly, is that it did delay the opening up of offices across the country, and it did, in a way, deny some services to electors that they are entitled from the moment the writ is dropped. So that's why I'm advocating for more certainty.
Okay, last question from Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sir, my question is, do we know how many Canadians are overseas who are eligible to vote in the elections?
We have a register of citizen residing abroad. It has roughly, I would have to look up the figures again, but it's roughly 5,000 Canadians residing abroad. Okay. There is an estimate of the population of Canadians abroad, which runs over 1 million. But again, as I said, very few are registered.
So if they all were to register, then all those other 1 million, they will be eligible to vote.
They would have to register, but they would have to have been away from Canada for less than 5 years. That's the current status of the law.
Okay.
If they've been away for more than 5 years or haven't resumed residence in Canada, they can no longer vote. I say that with a caveat because the matter is before the courts. Okay. The Court of Appeal will be holding a Supreme Court, sorry, will be hearing it, I think, next winter or next winter, February, something like that.
Okay. Okay. My next question is, you say about the mail-in ballots. That could be prone to abuse because maybe one family member he or she could mail in ballots for the whole family. And what kind of checks and balances, you think they should be in place to stop that abuse?
We have check and balance, but again, to ensure that these are properly qualified electors. But I will not deny this is an unsupervised voting process. So we rely on the honesty and the good faith of Canadians. We have also a system that provides that criminal offenses for this type of interference with voting. And we also are relatively easy to reach if someone wants to bring to our attention or the Commissioner's attention any irregularities with regard to voting.
Yeah, I know it will be based on the honor system, but by the time we find out, it'd be probably too late to charge anybody with offense.
But again, that's already the system in place. Whether you print your ballot or you get it by mail, the issue will be the same. The system assumes that those who rely on vote by mail will do it independently and secretly as all other electors. That's I'm sorry to say, but I don't know how we can allow those people to vote otherwise. It's a compromise we have to make.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And before I excuse our witnesses again, on behalf of Parliament and the committee, I think we owe a great deal of debt to you for a great job over the years and keeping our democracy strong. So on behalf of all of us, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It has been a true honor for me to serve you all for those many years. I guess some of you may have found it was too long, but it was a real pleasure, and it gave me a unique perspective on the type of work that is done here. I've always tried to bring to this committee the information they need, you need as members to do the very daunting task of reviewing legislation or reviewing reports as the one we discussed today. I saw my role as making sure that you had all the information that you needed to do your work, and stay away from providing any views or opinions that would indicate any any tilt towards any political views. I truly enjoyed my time with this committee. I always took the work very seriously, and it was, again, a pleasure and for me an eye-opener to see how parliamentarians, I think Canadians should see that more often, how parliamentarians, despite what we see in the media, manage to work together to do what they think is best for citizens in this country. And it's not an easy task. I don't necessarily envy you. And I'll be glad to go back to my civilian life and find again my right to vote, which I abandoned 10 years ago. And you bet that I will be looking in 2019 when I vote to see how modernized we've become. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
So I'll just leave a couple of minutes for people to talk to the witnesses informally, and then could we clear the room, please? We'll have in camera 10 minutes of committee business. Thank you.
you.